slides, and I'm going to go drive to my Flare dashboard. So I've logged into my Flare dashboard, and we are in our Scatterhold demo here. So this is obfuscated a little bit, and it doesn't have like customer data. But when you're in the platform and you're using it as a red teamer or you're using it as a CTI person, I mean, you get live data, which is awesome. So you'll normally land on the dashboard, and you'll be able to see just some overview about how you've set up Flare and your current benchmarking against kind of other places in your industry and things like that. And so that's the global dashboard. But me as a red teamer, I want to get to the credentials as fast as possible. So when you're in Flare, you want to go down to the events tab on the left hand side. And in the events tab, it's kind of like your global search. So right now I'm in a demo mode, so I can't verbatim search. But a lot of times when I'm in here, I will just search my customer name in here. So if I'm on a red team engagement, I will search, whatever company in here, and that'll grab all of the identifiers for that company. And identifiers mean, it could be leaked source code, it could be a credential, it could be a cookie. There's a lot of things that Flare parses the dark web and the clear web for to alert me on as like kind of a holistic exposure, right? Identifiers lead to exposures. Exposures are what I'm looking for because they'll help me hack this company. So in the menus here, I can, filter by severity. Usually Stealer logs are available in like the high and the critical severity level. So when I'm a red teamer, I will actually a lot of times remove the lower levels of stuff, but we're going to check out everything right now. And then you can do some filtering by how fresh the data is. And then the categories is kind of the second most useful filter for me when I'm going through Flare. So when I'm using it as a red team, I am not looking at lookalike domains in the first part of my process. And I'm less interested in the open web stuff in the beginning of my process. So I have a methodology that I follow as a red team, but the first thing I want to start doing is looking at credentials that are fresh and that I can use on my engagement to try to log into things I'm not supposed to be able to log into or shouldn't be, on the dark web, at least to identify. So I'll untick those, and then that'll set my filters up. And now you can see that there is some stuff here in our demo. And so here, if we click on this exposure, we have a Telegram sale and a room link for where this is being sold. So we can give it to our CTI analysts if they want to do some investigation. A lot of times I find this really useful to give, if I'm a red teamer, but I'm going to be working with the client, I can hand them, like a lot of great threat intel data from this, like where the sale is being done, if there's a coordinated, like, attack. And then there's metadata around this exposure here. So you can see it's a low severity tag. We have a content place where you can see kind of what they're talking about. So there's a DDoS project associated to this. And so this is just like kind of like a posting. It's like, hey, Scatterholt was mentioned in this thing. Here we have a ransom leak where our domain was one of our domains was mentioned. So in Flare, I'm monitoring for multiple different domains. Manufacturing coinc.com is one of those domains. And so when you set up Flare as a red teamer, usually what I do is you have so many identifiers that you get with Flare, and then I put in my customers' top level domains. So I mean, just fictionally, right? We could put flare.io, or you could put any company domain. And then you can put multiple company domains, and then they'll show up in this exposures list here in the events. And so here you can see that I'm being, referenced, one of my domains is being referenced here. Now, the good stuff is like the infected devices or the Stealer logs for red teamers, right? So here you can see I have a critical dated February 27th. And if I click here, a Stealer log is being sold on one of these sources. Now, a Stealer log is basically a preview of a campaign that a bad guy has done with Stealer malware, something like Redline or similar, right? And eventually they need to sell this data on these Telegrams or Discord channels or whatever, or forums, right? And so Flare is able to get this data and grab the content of some of the previews, and if they see the domain, of my customer, or here, you can see Scatterholt, you can see that they're inside of the Stealer log preview. And so you can actually download it. And a lot of times these Stealer log, packages are really big packages of a lot of compromised machines. So that's why they have to get this preview data out to make sure that it's, everybody knows, who has a prospective buyer knows it's fresh and things like that. So if I go to summary here, you can see that in the content preview, Scatterholt's mentioned, and this is good for me as a red teamer because I see the domain here, scatterholt.com, after the @ sign. So I'm pretty confident that they're not just, I know already they're not just mentioning the website Scatterholt, I'm going to say my website, or my customer's website, right? We know that since it's mentioned as an email address, this is probably an employee of Scatterholt, which is being sold, and it's already categorized as a, Stealer log sale here. And then you can see where the usernames and passwords in the Stealer log are being used here by the URL. So this is perfect for me as a red team here. The first thing I actually want to do is check to see if any of the credentials work on VPN appliances, or if I want to use them on Microsoft authentication services, or if they happen to be using like Google Suite or something like that. I'm looking to get access and a foothold either to the internal network, which this would be amazing if the VPN login worked for me, or into their kind of federated email system or something like that. And it really makes my life easier as a red team. So I have a pivot point, a trusted pivot point, to try to attack them further. So here you can see that in this Stealer log, the VPN creds look like they're there, and they're blurred out in here. But you get the raw data by clicking the download button. So in the demo, we're not downloading any files. At some point, we can show you kind of what a Stealer log output looks like. It's just a text file with a list of passwords, and they look very similar to this. But you can see also we can access their CRM and their main website too, with creds that look like in here. And because this is relatively recent data, it's still in within a year, or a little bit over a year. A lot of times, Stealer logs are very fresh, and so these credentials work way more than anything you could get from the same type of data sets that make it to the private web, or the public web, excuse me. So we also have some functions here to parse this a little bit to tell us the full the full stuff in the dump. This gives me, as a red teamer, also just like a good idea of what other stuff that the user is logging into, right? So 1RPM and some of these other sites that the user logs into. Remember, this is Stealer malware, right? And so, a lot of times what we see is that devices get infected by Stealer malware on accident, either through drive-by downloads, like someone tries to drive-by download a program, or people are trying to download a game crack or a torrent or something like that. These gray parts of the internet, that people are trying to use, and they're backdoored with Stealer malware. And then the Stealer malware gives the attacker full access to the computer. So they're able to pull all of these passwords you see on the right. This is straight out of browser memory. So you obviously know, when you have Chrome up or you have Firefox up and you're just daily driving your computer, you can save your passwords into Chrome's default storage for passwords. And Firefox has the same thing now. And so this is dumping that data into a text file for us to see. And we can see what other sites that this user goes to, the history. So these Stealer logs are really powerful. Not only do you get the credentials, which we preview here at Flare, and in the demo mode, they're asterisked out, right? They're obfuscated. But you also get in these Stealer logs cookies, which are phenomenal. And so as a red teamer, and even as an adversary, even when I put my blue team hat on, right? I was a CISO at a multinational organization. Cookie theft is one of the biggest issues right now, because your defense for your employees' passwords being leaked is, well, yeah, we can get them to change the passwords. And then also, like, okay, if they still have their machine that's owned, and we can't find it, and they change their password, the attacker's still going to get their new password because their machine is owned. And so the defense there is two-factor authentication, which many organizations are moving to two-factor authentication, and it does add another step for an attacker to try to get past an adversary. And what's useful about these Stealer logs, and what we found in my red teaming and my previous gig, was that cookies bypass two-factor authentication. So in these packs, and usually when you hit this download button here in the summary, you get the verbatim passwords that you can just try to put into the password places, but you also get the cookies that were associated to the browser, which means you don't have to enter the password and you don't have to deal with two-factor authentication. You just load those cookies into your own browser and then visit the website, and it just lets you in because you have the cookie. And so that's why Stealer logs as a package too are more powerful than just leaks that make it to some, from some database that you find anywhere. It's all good info for threat intelligence, right? To understand what credentials are leaked, but Stealer logs are especially powerful for red teamers and for CTI people to find and make sure that this stuff gets removed from the internet. And so from a defensive side, since I've worn all hats in my career, when you look at stuff like this and you find, fresh Stealer logs, usually it means that either your employee's corporate machine is owned with malware, or their home machine is owned with malware, and they were using their home machine to do work, which is very common, in the post-COVID era. And so, no fault for that. A lot of companies had to transition very hard to work from home, and they didn't have the capital right away to buy managed laptops for everybody, right? They couldn't just send all X thousands of people home and then right away buy them a laptop with antivirus on it and EDR software and security controls on it. They couldn't do it. So they had to send everybody home, and they started working on their home machines and logging into corporate websites. And so, the fix here is, as a CTI analyst, you looked at this data and you're like, okay, I have to figure out, like, I have to go talk to this user. And especially on this level, like we're on level 4 credentials right now, Stealer logs, you'll go talk to, you'll collaborate with IT, and you'll go talk to the user and say, hey, one of your devices here is owned. We need to do an investigation on it. We've already rotated, we're already ready to rotate all the credentials. We're going to kill all the cookies too. A lot of these sites like CRMs and VPNs and just main websites, you can you can flush their cookies so that those cookies are invalid. And then at the same time you do all that, you also have to make sure that you re-image their machine so you're 100% sure that they don't have the malware anymore on their machine. And so really, when you get owned at this level as a user, it is quite a critical workflow to work with IT and security to make sure that that thing gets re-imaged and everything's good and safe. And so if you're a CTI analyst, that's the kind of policy you want to build into this level of breach credential. So if you go back to our tenant, and you can still log down, you can see that there's other kind of stuff that Flare will release on, and we can filter on it verbatim. This area right here where it says leaked on will actually give us all of the credential leaks for Scatterholt when we see Scatterholt after the @ sign in a forum or a Discord or something like that. And so this is a useful view for me as a red teamer or even a CTI person, because when I get to the leak on section, I can sort by date found, which is useful. It'll give me a sense of how fresh the credentials are and where they came from. And then Flare has like a source ID, is like what breach this was from. And so this is like that level 1 data or maybe level 2 data, right? And so you can see here we have indicator of identity is someone at Scatterholt, and then their password here or the hash that's released. And so here you can see that we can sort it by date found, but you could also sort it by the type. So you can sort it by the type here, and then if there were Stealer logs in this view, you could pull it up here, but I really only have one here. So that's a kind of overview of, as a red teamer, immediately, if you want to jump in to look at stuff for credentials, that's kind of what you would do. Now, there's a lot more that Flare can do. I'm obviously just looking right now at marketplace posts or marketplace items, forum posts, profiles, chats, ransom leaks, and infected devices areas of our parsing of the dark web. And then leaked credentials is a broader category I want to make sure I hit for some of the stuff that maybe makes it to the public web. Now, there's a bunch of stuff too, which you can get from the open web, and that Flare does for lookalike domains, which are useful in other parts of the red team kind of life cycle. And so if I set these filters here, the reason that you would want to monitor a lookalike domain is basically because they're usually set up to phish your site. They're phishing infrastructure for bad guys. And so we want to alert on, all of these that exist so that you know that there might be phishing emails coming from this, and then you can build security policies, to block these lookalike domains. And so, we go out in the, on the web and parse a lot of DNS stuff to get this data for you. Then we have alerts for stuff that may be on the web. And this is useful for red teams really well. You're probably already going to port scan your target, but some of that data will probably already be in Flare, right? And so here we can see that there's a Postgres database port open on the main domain scatterholt.com, which is probably not great. We shouldn't have just like a raw like Postgres database port open public to the web. That's not really something that you want. And then preliminary looking at it, maybe it doesn't require a credential to get into this database, which would really suck for this customer. And you can see that these are parsing things like Shodan, and our own parsers and stuff like that. So you can see here that there's another website that requires authentication on port 8080. And so this is really useful information to start off your kind of external vulnerability analysis when you're doing a red team, right? To see all the websites that are out there. Flare, once you give it a thing like scatterholt.com, a top level identifier, it will find all the subdomains for you. So for me, I'm a very big reconnaissance person, and I want to find every site that my target has. Flare helps me do that. They do a lot of subdomain enumeration, and then they scrape that data and they, co-locate it with things like Shodan and give you excellent views of kind of what's out there. And so I could scroll through this. Again, Elastic is absolutely something that I would target as a red teamer to see if I could use it as a pivot point to attack a company. And sometimes you get lucky in this data too. Like you'll find cloud exposed buckets, you'll find credentials on GitHub, and those can be really, really useful. So here's a collection on GitHub. If I click here, and the problem here is that your organization probably has anywhere from 10 to hundreds of developers, right, depending on what you do at your company. And what happens sometimes is these developers are coding using a platform to keep their code organized, like GitHub, and then they will accidentally commit private code from your company that has like a password or a API key that's secret on their public GitHub. And so Flare will do the parsing of all of GitHub to find mentions of here, our domain Scatterholt. And so here you can see that it's alerting that there's a secret detected in a file that's on a public GitHub page. Anybody can see this page. And so this is a very common thing for bug bounty hunters to find, right? They will find, if you've ever had a bug bounty, you know that you've probably gotten a few of these findings come through your platform. And, it's like, oh, AWS secret key and AWS access key are exposed on this, on this GitHub profile right here, which is probably really bad. You don't want your AWS secret key and an access key exposed that gives people all access to your Amazon account. So Flare does a lot of parsing for that kind of stuff.